Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Reimagined Energy podcast, where we explore what's next in energy, sustainability, and the innovations shaping our future. I'm your host, Maria, and today we're diving into a topic that's becoming more and more essential: how we actually know if a supply chain is sustainable. Our guest today comes from OPTEL Group, a global leader in traceability and vision systems. If you've ever wondered how companies track products from point A to point Z and how they actually make sense of all that ESG data, well, this episode is for you. Optel saw this need for clear, verifiable environmental data, especially with today's complex supply chains. So they built OpChain, a dedicated ESG traceability platform designed to help businesses make smarter and more sustainable decisions. We're going to talk about why tracking emissions really matters, what a truly sustainable supply chain looks like, how AI is changing the game and ESG reporting, and where Optel is heading next in the fast-moving space. Let's get into it. Welcome, Foued Barouni. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for joining me today. Optel Group is very, very interesting in the sense that you do a lot of measuring. There's a lot of data. But tell me first, tell me about your Optel Group and also your background, how you all started in this area.
OPTEL is a company that is based here in Quebec City, and we've been in the traceability technology for over 35 years. But we also have a mission and we have a purpose as a company. We are trying to help organizations to build a better planet and to build a better world. This is why we are using technology and we are a tech provider to help companies to build a sustainable supply chain. I joined the OPTEL a couple of years ago with a background in engineering and also in climate tech. And I think it's very aligned with the OPTEL's mission.
Awesome. Well, why is it important in the first place, to track GHG, that's greenhouse gas emissions and the ESG standards? Why now? Why is it important?
Well, companies that are committed to build a better world and to comply with also emerging regulations, but also to face committed consumers to build a better world, need to have a plan and need to establish a path towards various targets, like, for example, net zero and so on. This is why traceability is going to be very important, because you will have to understand what's going on in your supply chain and build a plan, and you can track it after that. And that's why traceability is going to help these companies.
Hmm. Describe what a sustainable supply chain, what does that look like?
Well, a sustainable supply chain is a trustable, traceable, and also a verifiable supply chain. So you can have a certain level of visibility over the supply chain on actors, but also products that you are building. So you can track the life cycle of your product from sourcing the product to making the product to using the product and to recycling the product. It's very important to know all the data and information, I would call it this way, to track the impact of the product on the environments and make actions on the supply chain. And this is where traceability is going to help, because sometimes we don't know what's going on when we deliver a product and we ship it to the market. We don't know what's going on with all our suppliers we have. So it's very important to use traceability to track our supply chain and have a sustainable supply chain with more details that we can use for this.
There's a lot of fake actors out there. They say they're sustainable, but really they're not. And a company like you really tracks that record and keeps them accountable, I would say, right?
Totally. And I think sustainability is not a checkbox anymore.
Mm.
That's the idea, actually. maybe before a couple of years ago or decades ago, it was maybe a voluntary action that can be taken by a company, for example. But now we have pressure and also emerging demands from the different actors, governments, consumers, investors. You really need to provide real insights about a sustainable supply chain, and you need to show that you have a minimum of trust on the data that you are providing. Reports must be verified, and technologies like traceability is going to help for that.
Hmm. How deep do you dive into the data? Where, like, how granular do you get?
Well, very deep. I'd like to take an example. Let's take a cell phone. This cell phone is made with different components, for example, and we need to know what's going on in this cell phone. So the first thing we need to do is to have a good idea about all the components that have been used to build this cell phone. But I realize, for example, that one of the major components, and I think you use it very often, I use it very often, is, for example, the camera. So this camera is made by a supplier. I need to know who is this supplier first, where he is located, because this supplier is going to also provide me with some information, because maybe he is located in various places. So the energy, for example, used to produce this camera in one country might be used using renewable energy, but he can be also, or he can have other facilities in other places where the energy used is made on, for example, fossil fuels. So we need to have this level of granularity to better understand our supply chain. So once I have this information from the camera supplier, I can use it to calculate, for example, my product carbon footprint. And this product carbon footprint data can vary, depends on the supplier, it depends on the location where the supplier is. But let me go a step further here. We are talking about GHG emissions, as you mentioned it at the very beginning, but I can also have some effort to onboard this supplier to ask him questions about, for example, his best practices to fight against forced labor and child labor, for example. I can have the same camera supplier who is maybe ticking all the boxes about fighting the supply forced labor and child labor, but I can go deeper and I can ask this supplier, this camera supplier, to ask his own suppliers, for example, the lens or any other electronic components, what's going on in your supply chain? Are you, for example, getting the energy from a renewable source? Are you fighting, or do you have a policies to fight against child labor and forced labor, for example? And this logic can apply to all the suppliers that can participate to build this camera, and then this camera will be used in the phone. So we can go deeper, and we can call them tiers, different tiers. So we can at the beginning ask the company to just engage with tier one and collect the data for tier one, and then we can go deeper and maybe go to up to the source or the raw materials that can be used to build the camera, and then this camera can be used in the phone.
Wow. When we spoke earlier, you mentioned hotspots. Sometimes they can appear. I guess describe what is a hotspot, I guess, in your terminology, and also how do you identify when to take action, to fix these hotspots?
Well, let's get back to the camera and the cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
We can conduct what we call a life cycle assessment of the cell phone and see what are the different contributors to make this phone and what's the environmental impact of each one of these components. And we can realize, maybe it's just an assumption here for clarity purposes, to that the camera has the largest source of emission. So the largest source of emission is considered as a hotspot. And this is where, if you have commitments toward, for example, reducing the product carbon footprint of your cell phone, you can work with this particular supplier as a team to maybe have a camera with less carbon emissions, so it will have an impact on your cell phone at the end of the day. And that could be an action like, for example, shipping from places that are closer to your facility, maybe using electric vehicles to ship these cameras, or maybe switch to renewable energies. So basically, hotspots are going to be key aspects to help you to take actions and reduce your carbon emissions. But we can extend these actions to other actions, like, for example, sourcing from suppliers who are respecting and fighting actually against child labor, or, for example, fighting against deforestation when we refer to, for example, to the food and beverage industry, and so on and so forth.
How does AI contribute to ESG?
Well, AI, I think it's very good to get started at the beginning, for example, to calculate, for example, a product carbon footprint or to comply quickly with a regulation that is emerging, especially, for example, in some countries. But I think AI is going to help a lot in scaling these initiatives and helping organizations to deal with a large amount of data that can be structured or unstructured data, but also filling the gap between existing and non-existing data. And I can take a simple example here. We can have a large organization that wants, for example, to calculate the product carbon footprint of a cell phone, back again to the cell phone. But I can reach out to my supplier and ask him what is the camera product carbon footprint, but he doesn't have this information probably available. So AI can help, for example, here to bridge this gap and to help to automate and calculate in a fast manner the product carbon footprint of the camera. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's fine, but we can get started first. The second item is we work with maybe a large organization that don't have one cell phone. They have maybe 10,000 products. An average time to calculate, for example, a product carbon footprint can be 3 months, 2 months. So I'll let you imagine how long it's going to take to this company to calculate the product carbon footprint of all their products in the business. So using AI can help to automate and to speed up the calculation and help to bridge the gap between what the company wants and in terms of commitment and sustainability and what's currently available in terms of technology and calculation methods.
Do countries worldwide, I guess they would each have their own sustainability reporting, and probably each country is a little different than the other, right? And there's expectations within their supply chain. So how do you manage? How
Well, I think there are common now reporting framework and regulation that are emerging that help to standardize these type of requirements. The other thing is there are also a lot of working groups that are emerging to standardize these technologies. For example, the WBCSD, the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, is doing a great job. The OPTEL is part of the WBCSD, active member. We try to contribute, bring our expertise and advocate to standardize different methodologies. There is also interoperability, which is very important. We work with large players like, for example, ERP players, enterprise resource planning software providers, to try to maximize the data interoperability so we can help these organizations, even if they are spread across the globe, to have something that is more standardized and more formal, and it will help to reduce the friction of implementing and deploying sustainable supply chain softwares.
what projects are you working on now? What's next for OPTEL?
Well, it's a lot of challenges. We have a large project that we are currently deploying with our customers to deploy traceability across their supply chain. So we need to have this visibility. We need to increase the impact and the trust on the data that is used. And this is, I think, we strongly believe that traceability is a key player here to bring this level of trust. First, this is the first step that we are trying to have. The second one is once we have this data, we need to be smarter. We can predict a little bit more. We can take actions and we can run simulation. We can have better plans. And this is where I think OPTEL is going to be helpful again as a next step. So we will increase the level or the better manage their supply chain to build a more sustainable one.
All fantastic, Foued. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very, very much for this opportunity.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Reimagined Energy podcast. I hope today's conversation gave you a clear picture of how traceability and technology are reshaping the way we think about sustainable supply chains. If you enjoyed this episode, there's more where that came from. We talked to people behind the innovations, from clean fuels and EVs to green buildings and policy shifts, all with a focus on what's possible. Follow or subscribe where you get your podcasts, and if you're feeling generous, leave us a review. It helps others discover the show. This podcast is sponsored by the government of Nova Scotia and also Smart Energy, Halifax and Vancouver. Until next time, I'm your host, Maria. Stay curious and keep reimagining what energy can be.